that's shaped who I am today. It's a story that starts with love, but like most things in life, it's not just about the good moments. It's about the twists and turns, the pain and the healing. So, grab a cup of tea, sit back, and let me take you through it. It all began when I met John. To most people, he seemed like just another ordinary guy. Nothing too special at first glance. He wasn't a millionaire, he wasn't famous, but he had something that drew me to him. He was kind, thoughtful, and we could talk for hours about anything. We were both dreamers, always planning for the future, talking about the kind of life we wanted to live. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but to me, it felt like something special. We shared everything, our hopes, our fears, our plans. It was like we were building this little world together, a world where we could always count on each other. We saw each other every day. John would show up at my apartment and we'd just sit and talk. He made me feel seen, heard and understood, something I hadn't experienced much before. We talked about our futures, what we wanted to do, where we wanted to live, even what kind of family we dreamed of having. We were young, carefree, and full of hopes. I felt like we were inseparable, like nothing could come between us. But, of course, life is never that simple. It wasn't long before something came up. One day, we had an argument. It wasn't anything huge at first, just a misunderstanding, but it quickly spiraled out of control. Words were exchanged, feelings were hurt, and suddenly everything changed. I could tell something was off, but I didn't know how to fix it. I thought it was just a bump in the road, that we'd get past it, but we didn't. John stopped showing up. He stopped calling. He didn't even text me to explain what had happened. I waited for him to reach out. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself staring at my phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything to make things feel normal again. But nothing came. It felt like he had vanished, like he was never part of my life at all. The silence was deafening. During those weeks of waiting, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept thinking about what had happened between us, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Was it something I said? Was it something I did? I couldn't get the answers, and that uncertainty ate at me. I tried to move on, but it was hard. John had become such an important part of my life, and suddenly he was gone, just like that. And then the surprise came, the kind of surprise that would change everything. I found out I was pregnant. I remember the moment I saw the test result, my heart dropping to the floor. I was scared, confused, and completely overwhelmed. How was I going to handle this? How would I tell John? The reality of it all hit me hard. I hadn't planned for this, and now I was carrying a life inside me. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified of facing this alone, especially since I had no idea what had happened with John. I tried to reach out to him, hoping for some kind of support, but it was like he had disappeared off the face of the earth. I wrote him messages, I called, but there was nothing. I was alone in this, and the weight of it all felt unbearable. The months after I found out I was pregnant felt like an endless storm. The fear and uncertainty about what to do next never left me. I had always imagined my future, but suddenly my life was entirely different from what I had imagined. I was alone, I didn't have the answers, and I didn't have anyone to turn to. The hardest part was knowing that John, the person who was supposed to be there for me, was completely out of the picture. I told my parents as soon as I could. They were shocked, of course, but they didn't hesitate to support me. They were there for me in every way they knew how. My mum would sit beside me at night, holding my hand as I cried, telling me that everything would be okay. But I didn't feel okay. Nothing felt okay. I didn't know how I was going to handle this, especially with the pregnancy complications that started to arise. My daughter was born early. The moment she arrived, I knew something was wrong. She was so tiny, so fragile. The doctors immediately rushed her away, and I was left in a hospital bed, filled with questions that no one could answer. My heart broke every time I heard her weak cries. I wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but I couldn't. I had no idea what was happening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't ready for any of this. As the days passed, the doctors confirmed what I had feared. My daughter had a serious health condition. Her medical bills were astronomical. I couldn't even begin to wrap my head around how much it was going to cost to get her the treatment she needed. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any savings, and I was already overwhelmed by the idea of raising a child on my own. But now, it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. I tried everything I could think of to make ends meet. I reached out to local charities. I sold a few things I had, but nothing was enough. Every time I looked at my daughter, my heart shattered because I couldn't give her what she needed. She deserved so much more than I could provide. And still, John remained silent. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't help. He knew I had given him the option to be part of our child's life. All I needed was for him to care. I didn't want him to take full responsibility, but I wanted him to show that he cared, that he was willing to help in whatever way he could. But all I got from him were empty words, promises that he would send $100 a month for child support. $100 a month. That was his answer. I was angry, hurt, and frustrated. But more than that, I was heartbroken. My daughter needed so much more. She needed medical care that would cost thousands, and here he was, sending only enough money to buy a few diapers. But I couldn't even bring myself to confront him. He ignored me, and I was left to carry the burden on my own. The months dragged on, and my daughter's health continued to worsen. I couldn't sleep at night, thinking about what would happen if I couldn't afford her treatment. Every time I saw her smile, I knew deep down that her future was uncertain. But I didn't want to give up. I couldn't give up. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was scrolling through my phone when I saw John's face. He was everywhere. There he was, in fancy suits, surrounded by reporters, talking about his success. He was no longer the man I once knew. He had become a millionaire, someone people admired and looked up to. But it was the pictures of his lavish lifestyle that struck me the most. He had bought his wife a brand new car worth over $300,000 and a mansion that looked straight out of a magazine. And yet, here I was, struggling to keep my daughter alive, and he couldn't even send me a few extra dollars for her treatment. I couldn't understand how someone who had so much could turn his back on his own flesh and blood. I felt so small, so insignificant, compared to his world of wealth and luxury. But as much as I wanted to hate him for what he was doing, I just couldn't. I loved him once. I wanted to believe that there was a good man inside of him somewhere. In my heart, I knew I had to reach out again. Maybe this time he would hear me. Maybe this time he would care. But I was wrong. This time, when I messaged him again, he blocked me. I was crushed. Completely crushed. The man I'd once loved, the father of my child, wanted nothing to do with me or our daughter. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. John's rejection had cut deeper than I could explain. Every day, I felt like I was carrying a heavy, unspoken weight. I was angry, devastated, and so completely lost. I wanted to scream at him, ask him why he could be so cruel, but what would it change? It wasn't like he was going to listen to me. He had blocked me. He had made it clear he didn't want any part of our daughter's life. But even so, I couldn't stop thinking about how unfair it all was. What hurt the most was not just that he'd left me to deal with everything alone. It was that my daughter, my little girl, was suffering, and no one seemed to care. I would spend long nights holding her in my arms, whispering promises that I would never give up on her, no matter what. But deep inside, I knew that there was only so much I could do alone. I needed help. I couldn't keep pretending I had everything under control when it felt like I was drowning. One evening, as I sat in my tiny apartment, the weight of it all became too much. I had been keeping everything inside for so long, pretending like I was okay when I wasn't. I couldn't do it anymore. So, I decided to share my story. I didn't know how it would turn out, or if anyone would even listen, but I couldn't stay silent. My daughter deserved better, and I needed to stand up for her, even if it meant putting myself in the spotlight. I posted a long message on social media, explaining everything. I talked about the challenges we faced, the constant hospital visits, the unmanageable bills, and the heartbreak of knowing that John, despite everything, had ignored us. I poured my heart into every word. I didn't care what people thought. This wasn't about me. It was about my daughter's future. I remember hitting the post button and sitting there, staring at my phone, my heart pounding. I had no idea what would happen next. Would people judge me? Would they accuse me of trying to destroy John's life just because he was wealthy? I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's life. I just wanted my daughter to have the chance to live. To my surprise, the response was overwhelming. People began sharing my story. Some left messages of support, others donated money to help with medical bills, and a few even offered advice. I couldn't believe how kind and caring strangers could be. It was like the world was rallying around us. For the first time in months, I didn't feel so alone. But even with all the support, there was still a part of me that was scared. People criticised me too. They said I shouldn't be airing my private problems on the internet. They wondered why I was talking about John now, when he was rich and famous, instead of when we were struggling. Some even said I was just looking for money. I just wanted the world to know that my daughter mattered. She wasn't just a footnote in someone else's life. She was real, and she deserved a chance. But despite the attention and the messages of support, nothing changed for us. John didn't reach out. The money didn't magically appear, and my daughter's health didn't improve. Life kept moving, but the pain of it all stayed with me. I had tried everything. I had told the world my truth, and now it felt like I had no choice but to focus on the future. It was hard. I felt tired, emotionally and physically drained, but I couldn't give up on my daughter. She was everything to me. And then, just when I thought nothing would ever change, something unexpected happened. I received a message from John. After all these years, he was finally reaching out. He wanted to see our daughter. He wanted to make things right. When I first saw John's message, my heart stopped. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. For so long, I had lived with the idea that John didn't care, that he was gone for good, leaving me and Emily to fend for ourselves. But now, after everything, he was reaching out. My first instinct was to ignore him. Why should I give him the chance to make things right now? He had ignored us for so long, and nothing had changed since. But deep down, a part of me wondered if he was really different now. Could he be? I spent a few days thinking about it. I talked to Mark, my husband, about what to do. Mark had always been so supportive, understanding that Emily's father wasn't around, but he had also been very clear about how important it was for us to move forward as a family. Still, he encouraged me to let Emily make her own decisions when it came to John. She was old enough now to understand who he was, even if he had been absent. Eventually I decided that if John really wanted to meet Emily, then I couldn't stand in the way. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her and what was best for her. I agreed to meet him at a local park. When I told Emily, she was so confused, almost too quiet about it. I wasn't sure if she felt nervous, angry, or just unsure of what to expect. After all, John hadn't been a part of her life for years, and now he was suddenly back. We arrived at the park, and there he was. John was standing by a bench, holding a small gift bag in his hands, his face slightly tense. He looked different. His hair was shorter, and his clothes were more polished, but his eyes were tired, like they carried years of regret. Emily didn't know what to do at first. She clung to my side, not wanting to make the first move. It was clear that she didn't recognise this man as someone who had ever been a part of her life. I gently nudged her forward, and after a few moments of hesitation, she slowly walked toward him. John knelt down to her level, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry," he said, tears in his eyes. "I should have been there for you. I should have been there for both of you. I can't change the past, but I want to try to make it right. Please forgive me." Emily just stared at him. She didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. After a long moment, John handed her the gift bag. It was filled with a few small toys, nothing too extravagant, but enough to show that he was trying to make amends in his own way. Emily took the bag slowly, her eyes wide, as if she were unsure of whether to trust him. "I've also set up a trust fund for your medical expenses," John continued, his voice steady but full of regret. "I'll be paying for your treatments from now on. I'll do whatever it takes to help." You're my daughter, and I failed you, but I want to be part of your life now. I'll make sure you never have to go through this alone again." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The old John, the one who had turned his back on us, seemed so far away now. This was a man who was ready to make real sacrifices, not just throw money at the problem. For the first time, I saw the possibility of change in him. I looked at Emily, waiting for her to say something, anything. But instead, she took a deep breath, looked up at me, and nodded slowly. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, just sitting and talking. John didn't try to rush things, and neither did I. He wasn't trying to make up for lost time with empty promises. He was simply there, listening, showing that he was willing to put in the effort. I could see the sincerity in his eyes. As we left the park, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was relief, but there was also a lingering question. Was this real? Could someone really change that much after all these years? Only time would tell, but for the first time in a long time, I had a glimmer of hope. It had been a few months since that day at the park. John had kept his word. He not only paid for Emily's medical treatments, but he also regularly visited us, keeping his promise to be part of her life. Things weren't perfect, of course. There were still awkward moments when Emily would pull away from him, unsure of how to feel. But there were also moments of connection, small gestures that showed Emily was slowly beginning to trust him again. One afternoon, while Emily was at school, John and I sat down at the kitchen table. It was a quiet moment, just the two of us. There was a lot unsaid between us, and we both knew it. He had done a lot to prove he was serious about being a part of Emily's life, but there was still a lot of hurt to work through. "I never thought I could make it right," John said, breaking the silence. "I spent so many years thinking I'd lost everything, and then when I saw the way things were going with Emily, I couldn't just sit back anymore. I wanted to be a better man for her, for you." His words hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I had spent so much time resenting him for all the years he had missed, but hearing him speak so honestly made me realise something important. People do make mistakes, and sometimes they change. Maybe he wasn't the man he had been before, but he was trying to be better now, and that mattered. "I appreciate everything you've done," I said quietly, my voice catching in my throat. "But there's still so much to work through. It's not just about the money, John. It's about the years you missed. It's about all the times Emily needed you and you weren't there." John nodded, his expression softening. "I know. I can't go back and fix the past, but I want to make sure the future is different. I want to be a part of her life. I want to be her dad. I want to be someone she can rely on." His sincerity was clear, but it still didn't make the process easier. It was going to take time for both of us to heal, for me to forgive, and for Emily to feel safe in opening her heart again. But as I looked at John sitting there, I realised something. The process had already begun. The fact that he was willing to put in the effort without asking for anything in return spoke volumes. A few weeks later, John surprised us again. He didn't just send a gift or make another grand gesture. He started to show up for the little things. He helped Emily with her homework, took her to the park, and even spent time with me, just talking, like we used to before everything had fallen apart. It wasn't flashy. flashy, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I felt like a real family again. One Saturday morning, John took Emily out for ice cream. When they came back, Emily was smiling from ear to ear. She had a small stuffed animal in her hand, and her eyes were bright. "Look, Mum," she said, holding it up. "John got me this. He said it's for being brave." My heart swelled with pride as I looked at the two of them. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. We were healing, step by step. Emily was slowly starting to accept John in her life again, and I too was learning to let go of the past and trust in the man he had become. That night, as we sat together in the living room, I realised just how